What if I told you that the structural blueprint for Homer's ancient Odyssey isn't actually found in some dusty classical library, but it's hiding in plain sight in a modern hip hop album?
It sounds kind of crazy when you first hear it, right?
Right, totally.
Yeah.
But welcome to today's deep dive, everyone. We are really thrilled you're here with us. We're taking a stack of analytical research today
Yeah.
and decoding how Kendrick Lamar completely rewired the DNA of an entire genre.
Yeah, because it is a massive structural shift.
Yeah.
We're talking about moving an art form from, a medium of momentary expression into these sprawling classical epic poetry formats.
Which is just a huge leap.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And when you finally understand the why and the how behind a piece of art, when you expose the invisible scaffolding holding the entire project up, I mean, it completely changes how you experience the audio.
Yeah. So for you listening right now, if you are someone who loves those aha moments, this is sort of your mission today. We are going to decode that hidden architecture. You might have memorized every lyric, bobbed your head to these tracks for years, but today we're revealing the meticulous, novel-like structures beneath the beats.
Right, the stuff you don't necessarily catch on a casual listen.
Yeah. But to really grasp the scale of this leap, we have to establish the baseline first. Historically, hip-hop is an art form built on the ephemeral, right?
Right.
Like if you look at its foundation, the block parties, the MC battles, their radio hits, what was the primary goal back then?
Well, the primary goal was capturing a single fleeting moment.
Right.
It was all about generating this instant burst of emotion or, a flash of raw, immediate energy.
Just feeling it in the room.
Exactly. The art was highly localized in time. A track was basically engineered to hit you right then and there, then you moved on to the next one.
Right.
But Kendrick took this very same format, the 808 beats, the rhyme schemes, the vocal flows, and he demanded a radically different relationship with his audience.
He demanded active reading.
Yes, active reading. He started constructing albums that operate like long-form literature. You can't just drop in on track 4 and understand what's happening.
Right, you'd be totally lost.
Exactly. To comprehend the narrative, you're required to consume the entire project front to back because the songs are interdependent chapters.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second because it's like hip-hop was a series of brilliant, fiery, viral tweets, and Kendrick suddenly dropped a 500-page Tolstoy novel on our timelines.
That's a great way to look at it.
I mean, he's using the same basic alphabet, right? The same language, but the scale and the structural demands on the audience are just on a completely different planet.
Yeah, and Tolstoy is a helpful comparison for the sheer density of the work. But if we look closely at the architecture, it's actually much closer to ancient Greek literature.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, hip-hop, for a long time, heavily leaned into narratives of self-glorification, right?
Yeah.
Projecting invincibility, success stories, all that.
The bravado.
Right. But Kendrick pivots aggressively away from that. He centers his narratives on failure, on debilitating fear, on regret, and on deep internal contradiction.
Wow.
He takes these elements, which the genre previously avoided as, signs of weakness, and forces them center stage.
Which is just a staggering risk if you think about
A
it.
huge risk.
To stand up in a genre built almost entirely on bravado and essentially say, actually, I'm terrified and I'm making terrible mistakes.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here is that this focus on suffering and intense vulnerability is the defining trait of classical epic poetry.
Wait, really?
Yeah, epics aren't just highlight reels of a hero's ultimate glory. They are fundamentally about the agonizing trials.
Right. The struggles.
Exactly. There are the grueling journeys, the catastrophic mistakes, and the crushing weight of the hero's flaws. Adopting this exact thematic framework is the mechanism that elevates his albums into modern epics.
Okay, but every epic needs a stage, right? Like you can't have a grueling journey without a world to traverse.
You absolutely need a world.
And the stage here isn't some mythical ancient kingdom. It's his birthplace. It's Compton, California.
Right. Born in 1987, he stepped into a geography that had already been heavily mythologized by pop culture.
Right. Ever since NWA, Compton was globally recognized as the ultimate symbol of West Coast gangster rap.
Exactly. It was a space defined in the public consciousness by violence, poverty, and deep racial tensions.
Yeah.
But he refuses to use Compton as just a flat cinematic backdrop.
Right. The storytelling is grounded in these hyper-specific, granular details. I mean, he's naming exact intersections.
Yes.
He's mapping out residential areas. He's mentioning local fast food joints. It anchors the listener in a physical reality that you can literally map out on a grid.
Yeah, you could draw it.
So Compton isn't just the setting, it becomes a living, breathing character that actively exerts force on the people living inside it.
Which is exactly how it works in ancient epics, you know? The geography itself dictates fate, the city-state acts upon the characters, and we see him lay the groundwork for this generational storytelling really early on in his 2011 album, Section Point 80.
Okay, so how does that album fit into the structure?
Well, this album functions as the foundational chapter of the epic. It doesn't focus on one central hero yet. Instead, it acts as a wide-angle lens on the generation born during the Reagan era.
Right, but how does he translate something as abstract as macroeconomics and social policy into a musical narrative, though? Like, that sounds like a textbook, not an album.
By showing the exact mechanism of how top-down policies trickle down to the actual pavement.
Okay.
The album maps out how the influx of drugs and systemic education gaps didn't just exist as political theories, but they actively infected the daily lives of these youths.
Ah, so he personalizes it.
Right. He introduces characters who embody these statistics. It shows us how an entire generation was set up for failure before they were even born.
So he's establishing the historical and social stakes. He's showing us the complex web of the city before he even introduces the main hero's journey. And how he navigates that web is crucial because he never really plays the role of the detached observer just looking down on the streets, right?
No, never.
His perspective is constantly shifting. One minute he's narrating as a young, naive boy. The next he's a detached observer. Then he's the victim of the violence.
Right.
And then, jarringly, he shifts to being the perpetrator of that exact same violence.
Which directly mirrors classical literature, where the viewpoint bounces between the gods looking down, the mortal struggling on the ground, and the narrator weaving it all together.
Okay, wait, I have to push back on this a little bit.
Sure.
If the perspective is constantly bouncing between victim and perpetrator, between innocent kid and prophet, doesn't that make the narrator totally unreliable?
Yes, absolutely.
Like, if I'm the listener, how am I supposed to trust the story being told if the person telling it keeps changing their moral stance?
Well, that unreliability isn't a flaw in the storytelling. It is the core engine driving it.
Okay, how so?
If he provided a perfectly objective, reliable narrator, he would basically be spoon-feeding you a neat, sanitized moral lesson. You know, good guys on the left, bad guys on the right.
Right, which isn't real life.
Exactly. By making the narrator conflicted and constantly shifting, he forces you to grapple with the messy, contradictory reality of the streets yourself. It actively rejects a simple binary of good versus evil.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. So he's built this incredibly complex generational stage. But setting the stage is one thing. Forcing it to slow as a cohesive audio narrative is another entirely.
Oh, for sure.
Once the social stakes are established, the epic tradition demands we narrow in on the protagonist's actual trial. And that brings the focus tightly inward for the 2012 album Good Kid, M.A.A.D. City.
Right, and the sheer ambition of this album becomes staggering when you look at its structural constraints.
Right, the timeline.
Yeah, this massive, sprawling narrative actually spans just one single day and night in Compton.
One frantic, terrifying 24-hour period. But what blows my mind isn't just the timeline, it's how he holds that timeline together. He basically weaponizes the concept of skits.
Yes, the skits are brilliant.
Now, skits in hip-hop have been around forever, right? Usually utilized for comedic relief or just to break up the pacing between heavy songs.
Yeah, just filler, usually.
But here, they are narrative glue. We hear frustrated voicemails from his parents looking for their car. We hear the sudden, terrifying sound of gunshots. We hear casual, mundane conversations between friends riding in a minivan.
And those audio fragments aren't just atmospheric sound effects. They serve the exact literal function of a chorus in a classical Greek epic.
Right.
They are structural pillars that signal to the audience that a scene is changing or that time is passing.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. Using a nagging voicemail from your mom as the equivalent of an ancient Greek chorus to move the plot forward is absolute genius.
It really is.
It takes the most mundane, everyday audio artifact and elevates it to classical stagecraft.
And it demands the listener's active participation. You aren't passively receiving the story. Your brain has to actively piece together the timeline of that fateful day based on those specific audio clues.
Because it's not explicitly spelled out for you.
Exactly. The narrative arc of that 24 hours follows a precise, tragic structure. It starts with a simple morning departure, borrowing his mother's car, then meeting up with friends.
Just regular kid stuff.
Right. But then, a sudden brutal collision with violence. This forces the protagonist to face death and deep regret, and it ultimately concludes with intense introspection and a literal recited prayer.
It is the ultimate hero's trial. It's the story of a self-proclaimed good kid actively being swallowed whole by his environment.
Yeah.
But once a protagonist survives their immediate environment, once they master that specific 24-hour arc, the epic tradition demands they look outward. They have to confront their ancestry and the broader world.
And he does exactly that in 2015 with To Pimp a Butterfly.
Mm.
The camera drastically zooms out. Personal history in Compton expands into a sprawling exploration of Black history and American mythology at large. The storytelling becomes highly allegorical.
And to achieve this, he introduces this brilliant structural device, a fragmented poem.
Ah, yes, the poem.
Between tracks, you hear him recite just a few lines of a poem, and with every subsequent track, he adds a little bit more. It slowly builds and builds over the entire track list, and it only resolves fully at the very end of the record.
Which is a textbook epic mechanism. It's a tool for foreshadowing and resolution. It creates a narrative tension that spans the entire length of the work, forcing you to wait for the final payoff.
And what a payoff it is.
Oh, yeah. Because when that payoff arrives, it culminates in a deeply mythological motif. The poem is revealed to be part of a conversation he is having with the ghost of Tupac Shakur.
Right.
Conversing with a deceased predecessor, a spirit from the past, to gain wisdom. That it's a trope straight out of ancient mythology, much like a hero journeying to the underworld to speak with their ancestors.
It connects the personal struggle directly to the historical struggle. But, I mean, bending American mythology apparently wasn't enough for him.
No, of course not.
By 2017, with the album Damn, he tackles the actual fabric of cause and effect.
Yeah, Damn explores human nature through the lens of 7 core emotions or sins, heavily layered with religious allegory.
Oh,
But the true architectural marvel of this project is how it handles causality.
great.
The album features a tragic structure that is literally designed to be played in reverse.
Okay, I need us to really break this down because saying it plays in reverse sounds like a neat Spotify playlist trick, but it's actually a profound narrative mechanism. How does reversing the track list change the story?
Okay, so if you listen to the track list forward, from track 1 to 14, the narrative focuses heavily on themes of weakness and pride.
Okay.
The character makes a series of choices driven by ego, and it ultimately ends in their tragic, violent demise. But if you play the track list backwards, starting at the final track and finishing at the first, the narrative arc reverses entirely.
Oh, wow.
The sequence of choices completely shifts, and the story ends with enlightenment, survival, and a deeper understanding of his own complex nature.
I have to ask you about this because this time-bending concept is just wild. If an album changes its fundamental meaning when played backward, how does that change our perception of the artist's message?
This changes everything.
Like, is he telling us that our fate is completely dependent on the order of our choices? Like, if we just make one decision differently, the entire trajectory of our life flips.
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, he is forcing you to question free will versus determinism.
Let's clarify determinism for a second for the listeners. It's essentially the idea that all events are completely determined by previously existing causes, right?
Right.
Like reading a choose-your-own-adventure book where you realize the tragic ending is already written no matter what page you turn to, unless you literally read the book backward.
That is an excellent way to conceptualize it. By offering 2 different causal timelines, he elevates hip-hop from simply recounting a sequence of events to a philosophical exploration of destiny.
Right.
If the order of events dictates whether the story ends in tragedy or enlightenment, then the causality itself, the way time and choices construct our reality, becomes the primary theme of the album. It's no longer just a story about a person. It's an interrogation of how fate operates.
So let's just review this trajectory for a second. He maps out the systemic failures of a generation in section point 80.
Yeah.
He perfects the intimate 24-hour hero's trial in Good Kid, MAAD City. He confronts ancestral ghosts and American mythology into Pimp a Butterfly. And he literally bends the rules of cause and effect in Damn.
It's an incredible run.
After all of that, where could anyone possibly go next? What frontier is even left to explore?
Well, the only frontier left was entirely internal.
Which brings us to the 2022 album, Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. This feels like a massive, undeniable shift in the architecture of his storytelling.
It's a huge pivot.
The epic stops being a hero's tale altogether. It sheds that mythical armor and transforms into an incredibly raw, deeply human confession.
Yeah, the focus plummets from the broad societal and mythological levels directly into the claustrophobic space of the individual's inner mind.
Right, it's suddenly so intimate.
Exactly. The themes are no longer about navigating the physical streets or unpacking American history. They are about grappling with generational trauma, the toxic complexities of family dynamics, and the grueling, highly unglamorous process of psychological therapy.
And the physical structure of the album perfectly mirrors that internal division, doesn't it? It's a two-part record.
Yes.
The first half, The Big Steppers, represents the outward public role he has played for a decade. The performer, the prophet, the voice of an entire generation.
Right.
And the second half, Mr. Morale, represents the introspective, incredibly vulnerable, private self.
Over the course of his career, the trajectory of his storytelling has definitively moved from mapping the external world to excavating the deep internal mind.
It's almost like the epic hero spent a decade slaying all the dragons out in the world, only to realize the final, most terrifying boss was his own reflection in the mirror.
Wow, yes.
All those battles in the city, all those grand mythological conversations, they were almost a distraction from the hardest battle of all sitting in a room and facing his own trauma.
This raises an important question, though. What happens to an artist when the burden of being a public prophet becomes simply too heavy to bear?
Yeah, the pressure must be insane.
Exactly. When millions of people are looking to you to explain society, history, and morality, the weight of that projection is crushing.
Definitely.
Moving from public myth-making to private confession in Mr. Morale wasn't just an artistic choice. It was a matter of psychological survival. He had to dismantle the invincible hero he built in order to save the flawed human underneath.
To dismantle the hero to save the human, that is a powerful way to look at it, and it really brings us full circle on the incredible journey we've tracked today.
It really does.
We started by looking at the instantaneous, momentary roots of hip-hop. The block parties and the quick radio-friendly hits. And we've traced how those raw materials were meticulously engineered into a 21st century standard for epic album-length storytelling.
And the underlying mechanism of his discography proves that the genre has the capacity to hold the same structural weight, the same thematic depth, and the same narrative complexity as any classical novel or ancient text.
So for you listening right now, knowledge is most valuable when you actually apply it to how you consume art. The next time you put on an album, any album, don't just let it wash over you in the background while you commute or clean the house.
Right, pay attention.
Ask yourself, are you just hearing a random collection of songs, or are you being invited to actively read the chapters of a sprawling, meticulously designed novel? Look for the architecture. Look for that invisible scaffolding. It completely changes the experience.
It truly does. It turns passive listening into an active, challenging dialogue with the artist.
But before we let you go, we want to leave you with a final, lingering thought to ponder on your own. We've seen the progression of this architecture today.
Yeah.
If Kendrick Lamar has already mapped the physical streets of his city, reconstructed American mythology, played with the fabric of time itself, and excavated his own deepest psychological trauma, what form will the next evolution of the musical epic possibly take?
I mean, will future artists have to invent entirely new mediums or immersive technologies just to find a canvas big enough to hold their stories?
It's a massive question. The X-ray machine of how we diagnose and understand a hip-hop album has been permanently changed. The landscape is just vastly more complex than it used to be.
So much more complex.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We absolutely love unpacking the mechanisms behind these incredible pieces of work with you.
Keep listening closely, and we will catch you next time.